Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Exposure Scientist podcast. It's summer and it's that perfect time of year where things are getting warmer in much of the United States and the time of year where Legionella and Legionnaires disease starts to, I'll say, proliferate again, when we should be keeping an eye out for the occurrence of Legionnaires disease and ensuring that our water management plans are adequate for at least understanding the risks that we are attempting to manage with those plans. I thought one bit of information and pieces of information, I've covered this on past podcasts and in some information I've presented on the tracking, I'll say, of cases or occurrences of Legionnaire's disease and how it's hard to track those. We have weekly updates. We have some states that have data that's more easily or readily available. We have the CDC weekly updates, past iterations of those. For annual numbers, those take a lot of time for the CDC to update. And I'm going to illustrate some of that information today. But I think it's interesting. This is kind of a discussion of not only Legionnaire's disease, but the use of, I'll say, AI for kind of understanding where risks may be. I think it's important to understand, and let's contextualize for Legionella and Legionnaire's disease risk that oftentimes the majority of occurrences of Legionnaire's disease are individual cases. Let's refresh on what a outbreak is. An outbreak is typically defined as two or more individuals associated with one particular facility over a certain period of time. In some areas, it could be 6 months. In some areas, it could be 12 months. Most of the time, they're just one-off cases. You'll see a case of this here, a case of it there. They typically are not outbreak scenarios. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of get an idea of what outbreaks have occurred within the last few years. Again, if you go on the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Reports, MMWRs from CDC, and look up Legionnaire's disease, it takes a lot of, I'll say, work to get there for publication in those. And I am astounded by some of the information I've seen as far as probably why it takes so long to get there. And I'm not going to mention the particular one, the particular individuals, but for example, there's one, I'm going to tie this in a little later. There's one MMWR associated with Legionella or Legionnaire's disease outbreak from 2022. On this article, there are approximately 30 authors, 30 people was required to review this, write this, investigate it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and that's probably why it takes so long to get this information out there. Is because it's got to go through so many eyes, go through so many iterations. In my opinion, that's a lot of unnecessary information. You can maybe look at AI and say, okay, let's use AI. Let's use news articles. Let's see what's going on. Let's information, as we say, from the field. So what I did was I challenged this one particular instance. I'm using Chat GPT. I said, generally, and I did two prompts here, and I thought it was interesting. And what this is telling me, and I'll tell you here in a moment, is the prompt is even going to depend on how your results come out. So, if, for example, I said, give me the the first one I said, give me the three largest or biggest Legionnaire's disease outbreak events from the past 5 years and list them in no order of cases. Well, when it first did that, it gave me from around the world. I was like, okay, well, let me refine my search. Let me say domestically from the United States. So it gave me, I'll just say I did three here. The first three it said was from Harlem in New York City in 2025. It said there were 114 cases. The second from ChatGPT, it said Marshall County, Iowa from 2025. That was 74 cases. And Grand Rapids, Minnesota from 2023. There were 34 cases. So I gave another prompt. I said, what are the biggest 5 domestic Legionnaire's disease outbreak events in the past 5 years and list them in order of number of cases and deaths associated with outbreaks? Very similar search. This left off some results and gave me other ones. So this is kind of an illustration of AI can be useful in some regards, but it still requires everyone to do their due diligence. Here it discusses Harlem outbreak. Again, it's 14 cases, 7 deaths. Napa County, which is in Napa, California, 17 cases. This one talked about Amsterdam nursing home, Manhattan, 8 cases. There were other ones that were associated with that aren't even mentioned here. Some I have particular knowledge of. So you're not going to get all the information readily available that you may need to. And this goes back to the presentations that I've given. This goes back to the information that I've looked at. You're not going to know outbreaks until it's much later on. In fact, this one particular one from CDC from a 2022 outbreak was not published until the end of 2023. Actually, the event was July. This claims July 2022 from Napa, California. And this was not published until December of 2023, a year and a half. That's not helpful for anyone, any practitioner in the field. Again, looking at weekly data, you kind of get an understanding of where things are as far as states, as far as generally just as states. But again, that's not always up to date. That's always being updated after the fact, and getting annual numbers takes years to get out. So looking at news stories may be a good way. I have a news aggregate that send me information daily on Legionella and Legionnaires disease, to kind of see what's going on, to see what's in the news, see where cases may be, because that's the best, most up to date information. You can use Chat GPT, but or any other AI. Again, I say any other AI. I haven't tested anything else, but I think it's important to say, listen, there's useful information here. You may have to do a few searches to kind of figure out what's going on and get the background information. But this is certainly your research and your knowledge and your understanding is certainly going to be more up to date than what CDC publishes in MMWRs or on their weekly reports. And again, as we've discussed, many of these cases are just cases. They're not associated with outbreaks. And there's a document, I think, from CDC from a few years ago, 2 years ago, that discusses an investigation of outbreaks for the past 10 or 15 years. And it's like, it's a very small number of outbreaks as compared to the annual number of Legionella and Legionnaire disease cases that are in the thousands. So that's important context. But what I'm doing and wanted to highlight here, at least in this introductory one, because what we're going to do, we're going to get into these a little more. We're going to kind of, at least based on the information that's available publicly, as far as we can say, it may be, news releases from local health departments. It may be local news stories. Is kind of take a look at these matters, see what's going on, see what the putative source was, see if the information that's available kind of points to that source, see if there's alternative potential sources that were not investigated and why they're not investigated. And I can tell you in many of these instances that, I've seen these particular ones that we're going to get into, but other ones that were sources that were completely just written off and didn't make any sense. But I think this is at least important for when you're getting ready for your water management plan, when you're kind of understanding, okay, what is my plan? Have I checked what have I done for my plan lately? There's lots of box checking that can go on these water management plans. I think that you need to make sure that it's more than just a box checking exercise when you're managing risk or attempting to manage risk, and explaining that to your folks on the ground, using this information to say, okay, well, there are cases, there are outbreaks, there are some deaths. Where are we seeing this? What are the causes? What information do I have available for understanding what where these cases are? Maybe getting into, again, as I get into the analysis, what were the boots on the ground, so to speak, saying that there were deficiencies in. Use the information where these deficiencies were observed in these cases, these outbreaks, to apply to your facility to make sure that you're managing risk as best you can. Again, there's there's no such thing as zero risk. The only time there's zero risk is when there's zero life. I mean, let's just be honest. You know, there's always going to be some level of risk. This is more of a qualitative high, medium, and low. What low risk are we looking at? Can we reduce things from a high risk to a low risk or minimum or negligible risk? How are we managing the risk in our facilities using the information that's available, um, using prior experience? Because, I've seen it uh, said at other conferences and say, well, the science on Legionella is settled, or if it were settled, then we wouldn't still be having outbreaks. But we're still having outbreaks. We're still having cases. Again, 2025, there are a number of them. So this is going to be a series that we're going to get into that kind of discusses it, puts it in context, but highlights it too, as it's getting hot again. We know what happens every time it gets warm outside, every time the seasons change, every time that summer comes around and more people are using the equipment, and there are always problems with making sure the equipment's maintained properly. Are you verifying that the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing are actually doing it? I find that there's nothing wrong with having third party verification. I've seen it plenty of times, and I think it's worthwhile saying, okay, let someone third party come in and verify that these people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Are they managing my risk appropriately? What else could they be doing? Are they holding up their end of the bargain, so to speak, of making sure that our facilities are complying with what's on our water management plan, or even their contractors? There's something the contract be like, yeah, even though they say that they're doing stuff for us, are they putting the risk? Is there information of the contract they have with us? No, I'm not a contract guy, but I can at least read the plain text and say, are they putting the risk back on us, saying, well, we're helping you with this, but we're not actually managing the risk? That's still up to you. Because a lot of times people say, oh yeah, we're going to help you manage the risk. But when it comes down to it, they may be helping you manage it, but they are not taking the responsibility for managing that risk. And that is important. There's distinctions there, that just because they are there on your behalf doesn't mean they're taking the responsibility that you have. And it may be, well, they're not, you may not be the experts, but I'll say the general consensus is then you should be getting someone who is that expertise to help you, give you that guidance, give you that third party oversight. So we're going to look at these outbreaks in some coming up episodes, take a look and see where there may be some room for improvement, not only from the management side of water, but from the investigative side of the outbreak. Was something missed? Was something overlooked? Are there other potential sources? This is going to be fun. If you have any comments or have any participation in any of the outbreaks that have occurred, or any feedback you want to give, please feel free to reach out. Or if you want to come on, if you've been involved in an outbreak and you have some unique, I'll say, perspective on it, come on. Let's have a discussion. I'm always up for chatting with people. This is today's episode, the Exposure Scientist Podcast. Hope you're doing well. Hope to hear from you soon. And I look forward to speaking with you in the next one. Take care. Exposure science covers a broad subject area, including toxicology, industrial hygiene, and risk assessment. From occupational, community, or environmental exposure scientists apply scientific methodologies to understand exposure risks and apply controls when necessary. We at Exposure Assessment Consulting have this expertise. Please reach out to us at info@exposureconsulting.com for a free 15-minute consultation to discuss the specifics of your exposure scenario.